unique is that its protagonists are voices from the Global South who work directly in their territories. We are convinced that their underground experience brings an invaluable perspective to our discussion. Our panels reflect not only geographic diversity, with the speakers from Latin America, Africa, Asia, and the Middle East, but also thematic and gender diversity, ensuring that our dialogue is enriched by a wide range of experiences and identities. These are not abstract debates. They are rooted in the realities of those who are both most affected by and most active in shaping the energy transition. This side event aims to expose the systemic barriers confronting defenders in energy transition processes, to advocate forcefully for the protection and empowerment, to present actionable guidelines that emphasize transparency, equity, and epistemic justice, and also to foster a robust dialogue to generate concrete recommendations for the G20 policymakers. Our program is designed to encourage a deep reflection and active engagement. Following these opening remarks, we host two panel sessions addressing challenges and opportunities and propose strategies for safeguarding rights and promote inclusive policies, culminating in a summary of collective call to action. I encourage all participants to actively engage, share your insight, and help shape a just energy transition that reflects the Global South aspirations and realities. In closing, I would like to thank you again for being part of this important discussion, particularly to Ignacio Lara, our project lead, who has been putting all of this together, and the team. We well know, as we just experienced, how difficult this can be sometimes. I also want to thank the generous support of the IDRC, the institution whose invaluable commitment and support allows all of this to happen. Now, just let me introduce to Adrian Di Giovanni from the IDRC, who will also share some remarks with us. Let me introduce you. Adrian is a senior program specialist at the IDRC in Canada. Since 2011, he has...
Recording in progress.
All of this has been very professional. He has spearhead research on law and development, focusing on public law, human rights, and legal empowerment. Previously, he has counseled the Department of Justice in Canada Human Rights Law Section and the World Bank's Legal Vice Presidency. He holds a Master in Law in International Law from the New York University and a professional degree from the University of Toronto. Adrian is a part-time professor at Carleton University Norman Patterson School of International Affairs and has previously also worked in Uganda and Tanzania. Again, thank you very much for your attention, and I hope you all enjoy this meaningful conversation. Adrian, the floor is yours.
Thanks, everyone. I'll say a few words of introduction from IDRC. And first of all, a big thank you to Matias and Ignacio and the whole Asuntos del Sur team for bringing us together today, and also to all the project teams who are joining us from across regions and time zones. I'm calling in from Ottawa, Canada, which is on the unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people, whose stewardship of these lands and waters we now call Ottawa dates back in time immemorial, as we say, for many centuries and generations. And we like to start sessions in Canada with a land acknowledgement, because it really affirms our commitment to recognize the history and experience of colonization in Canada. So as we try to move forward on really current day issues like climate change, we try to make the link to the past and experiences. And I'll say a few words on that, why it's actually so relevant when we're talking about climate change, climate defenders, Indigenous land rights peoples. The links are fairly clear and close. But it will definitely show up in my remarks today. And really what I just want to say is how nice it is to be together, all these group of partners from CALIDE, and also to have the opportunity again to engage with the T20 process. We started last year as a bit of an experiment. How could we feed the T20 task force on just transitions and start to bring, more perspectives of human rights and defenders into the dialogues on transitions. And so to be able to continue this year online, but in South Africa is we see as a great opportunity, especially with the group of projects and teams that Matthias already described. And so for us, this work on environmental human rights defenders really fits in a larger body of investments at IDRC on supporting civic space and on climate justice, especially in a context globally where civic space, defense of human rights is becoming more challenging. And even just larger democratic governance, democratic development, however defined, it's a more challenging time. Environmental defenders, as many of you know, are the most targeted group of human rights defenders globally. They face criminalization, surveillance. Matthias already spoke to this. We'll hear about it more. And really, so what we try to do in IDRC is support teams like you hear now, Southern Voices, perspectives, people in countries really at the front line of trying to find solutions and provide support and defense for communities who are really often what we'd say on the outside looking in. So facing threats, facing a violation of their rights, or even just left out of larger policy discussions around the future of societies, given the impact of climate change and the need to mitigate or adapt to it. And so really what we have done then is make an investment, and you've heard about it, into the CALIDE group of projects that really represents across regions in different parts of sub-Saharan Africa, the Middle East and North Africa, Latin America, Asia, series of groups who are really looking at similar questions that link across at a global level, but really then go deep across, I think it's over a dozen countries, to try to understand how to protect communities and how to move to these positive engagements with policymakers, like in a T20 and a G20 environment. And so we started about a year and a half ago, where we still have a couple of years ahead of us. And really, this is an important year with COP30 coming up. And we heard just a couple of weeks ago, the president, Andre Aranja Correa de Lago, he called for action grounded in ethics and science. And as part of that, this is in the upcoming COP30 in Belém, Brazil. He cited the need to address structural inequalities and emphasize the need for a just, orderly, and equitable energy transition. And really, we think that these issues that we're going to talk about today about environmental human rights defense, they're maybe haven't been given the attention that they need. In other words, they're kind of neglected or left outside of the conversation, but we think they're going to be more and more important in the coming years. And the reason is that, as we say, in these current trends of rising attacks on defenders, closing civic space, they speak to longer standing inequalities that may stand in the way of just and inclusive transition, these structural inequalities. And as we see the impacts of climate change, the impacts on defenders, we expect that some of these fracture lines may become more well-defined, they may become harder, may become more challenging, because we're really engaging oftentimes larger pre-existing historical and sometimes fault lines in societies around who has a voice politically, who's making decisions about environmental and natural resources, and who shows up when policies are made that affect people in many different ways of their lives. And so the impacts of climate change are new. Some of the dynamics that are feeding the policy processes in coming years aren't. And as I've said, they may be getting worse with larger challenges of democracy and civic space. So that's a bit the framing. We see the upcoming COP process, but in the following years, as really a chance to bring these issues within the climate policy space. When we started our own work at IDRC on climate justice, we found we really met in the middle with our colleagues on climate change, who care a lot about equity and inclusion, slightly different vocabulary and also different policy mechanisms, and really this focus on the defenders of communities and communities themselves as defenders of rights could be amplified. But coming from a human rights and justice perspective, I don't think we've done enough to develop evidence-based solutions, to engage the policy processes in strategic ways. And I think what we're trying to do, I know what we're trying to do with CALIDE, but I think these type of events and this type of momentum is really part, hopefully, of a longer-term inclusive change. We hope for what we'd call a transformative justice, climate justice, which is that we face these structural inequalities head on, and we work with communities, we work with government really to find a more inclusive, as we said, just transition. Those are a few reflections. We definitely remain committed as IDRC to supporting locally grounded, policy relevant research to drive systemic change. We've been doing it for over 50 years, and this is just one more moment in time where hopefully years from now we'll talk about something that we started with an idea and really brought important change and positive impact in people's lives. So thank you for your time and indulgence. I went 2 minutes over, but I look forward to following your work, not just today, but in the coming months and years.
Well, thank you, Adrian, to you, and also to Tanya that is here with us. She's going to be helping us with the closing remarks after. Now we're going to officially start the conversation. So I'm going to pass the word to Wilmer Reyes here, who's going to be moderating our first session. Wilmer, the word to you.
Muchísimas gracias. Muy buenos días, buenas tardes o buenas noches a todas, todos y todos donde quiera que estén. Realmente es un privilegio moderar esta sesión. Vamos a conversar en los próximos 30 minutos sobre los retos y oportunidades para una transición energética justa, y vamos a tener la participación de 4 extraordinarios panelistas que nos van a compartir sus experiencias, a los cuales voy a introducir a la brevedad. La transición energética, particularmente en todo el sur global, representa desafíos muy importantes, pero también muchísimas oportunidades. Si bien es cierto, toda la transición energética es fundamental, es crucial para abordar todos los temas de cambio climático y promover el desarrollo sostenible, también es cierto que requiere, al menos en el sur global, un tratamiento con lupa, una navegación cuidadosa, considerando todas las complejidades económicas, sociales, políticas, incluso ambientales que tenemos en la región. Es importante profundizar y tener muy en cuenta, particularmente los diseñadores de políticas, aspectos que tengan que ver con no seguir profundizando la equidad social, los problemas de acceso a la tecnología y a las finanzas en la región, los problemas de desigualdad, los problemas de derechos a la tierra y recursos naturales, y todo el trabajo informal perpetuado en la región. Pero también hay que reconocer que en esta transición representa oportunidades valiosas relacionadas con empleo ecológico, con nuevo acceso a información, energía más estable, diversificación económica, obviamente beneficios a la salud por reducción de contaminación y otros elementos. Y también hablamos de resiliencia climática. Entonces, para abordar estos temas tenemos este día, les decía, 4 extraordinarios panelistas a los cuales realmente me honro en presentar este día. Vamos a tener a Mati Balagat del Centro de Preocupaciones Ambientales de las Filipinas. Mati Balagas es la coordinadora actual de entrenamiento y servicios a la comunidad del Centro para Preocupaciones Ambientales en Filipinas, una organización no gubernamental trabajando con la comunidad filipina para abordar retos ambientales. Ella también es miembro del secretariado de la Red de Defensores Ambientales del Asia-Pacífico, una organización que lidera trabajo para fortalecer los derechos ambientales de la comunidad, igual la justicia climática, la protección del ambiente y los derechos humanos de los defensores en la región. Me gustaría tal vez, Mati, que se nos identifique de entrada, por favor. Adelante, Mati.
Hi. Hello.
Muchas gracias. También tenemos a Daniel Kobe del Programa de Desarrollo de la Población de Oye en Kenia. Es el director ejecutivo y fundador del Programa de Desarrollo de la Persona de Oye. en Kenia. Es una ONG basada en Kenia, está dedicado a la defensa de derechos humanos, particularmente de las poblaciones indígenas, y un entusiasta del desarrollo de la comunidad, quien ha participado en muchísimas discusiones de alto nivel, discutiendo asuntos que afectan a las comunidades indígenas. Daniel, por favor, si nos identificas.
Hello, how are you? Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias. Tenemos también a José Alwin, del Observatorio Ciudadano de Chile. José es un abogado con una maestría en leyes de la Universidad de British Columbia en Canadá. Él ha trabajado por décadas en el desarrollo de investigación, acción en la defensa de los derechos de las poblaciones indígenas, el ambiente, los negocios y los derechos humanos en Latinoamérica y el Caribe. Si se nos presenta, por favor, José, para identificarlo. Muchísimas gracias, José.
Hola, buen día, hello.
También como parte del Observatorio Ciudadano nos estará acompañando Luna Miggins. Ella es politóloga de la Universidad de Buenos Aires, dirige el área de Tierra, Vivienda y Justicia Económica en el CEL, donde trabaja sobre el problema de acceso a la vivienda en las ciudades, la disputa por la tierra y los territorios de comunidades campesinas e indígenas y el impacto del endeudamiento de los derechos humanos. Luna, por favor.
Hola a todos y todas, buenos días.
Bueno, vamos a entrar entonces en materia en esta fantástica conversación que vamos a tener el día de hoy con estos extraordinarios panelistas y vamos a retomar entonces solo para recordarle, vamos a tener estas 3 participaciones como instrucciones generales, unos 8 minutos como máximo por cada una de las organizaciones para que podamos salir en tiempo. Lo haremos en una sola ronda, también por cuestiones de tiempo, entonces vamos a pedirle a nuestros panelistas que nos puedan ilustrar de manera concreta en estos 8 minutos el tema que pretenden desarrollar. Mati Bálaga del Centro de Preocupaciones Ambientales de las Filipinas nos estará compartiendo en este momento la transición energética justa que está pasando en las Filipinas y cuáles son los problemas y preocupaciones sobre energía renovable. Quiero recordar a los panelistas y a todos los que nos están escuchando y viendo que todos estos temas tienen serias implicaciones sobre el trabajo y los retos que enfrentan los defensores y defensoras del ambiente, tierras y territorios en todo el sur global. Entonces siempre es importante poner en contexto nuestros intercambios en ese contexto de los retos que tienen los defensores, los indígenas y las comunidades locales en este proceso de transición. Así es que, Mati, por favor, con su conversación relacionada con la transición energética justa en las Filipinas y los problemas relacionados con energía renovable. Adelante, tenemos 8 minutos.
Hi, hello again, and good evening from the Philippines. So, could I just have a thumbs up if my audio is working all right? Presentation, is it on the screen? I'm very pleased and honored to be here as representing the Center for Environmental Concerns, Philippines, and also the Secretariat of the Asia Pacific Network of Environmental Defenders. Of course, as we all know, and the context was so brilliantly and clearly set out earlier, renewables is supposed to be a very positive force that the international community is moving towards. But especially in the case of Southeast Asia and in the Philippines, it has also become an increasing threat to environmental human rights defenders. So I would like to take this time to share just a few case studies from the Philippines. So of course, the Philippines is one of the most vulnerable countries to climate change, and every year we experience increasingly frequent stronger typhoons with millions of dollars worth of impacts, not just, of course, financially, but also in terms of lives. And it's understated that it really fractures the Philippine society. And of course, it's recognized now that there's an urgent need to transition away from the fossil fuel-based energy sources that have caused this crisis and transition to renewable energy. However, there have been many reports of human rights violations in areas with renewable energy projects. So first, in my presentation, I think I'd like to go through a bit of the policy framework when it comes to climate action and renewables. So the government has actually been promoting renewable energy as really a pathway to solve the climate crisis. So here are just a few policies. There is very clear wording that the Philippines is making a commitment to reduce emissions, and with one way to do this is, of course, transition to renewable energy sources and reduce dependence on coal. Here are the policies on renewable energy. So we have two primary policies with regards to this. The Renewable Energy Act 2008, which promotes the development and use of solar, wind, hydropower, ocean energy, biomass, and geothermal. It has incentives for renewable energy developers. There are also market mechanisms to promote renewables. There are the establishment of renewable energy zones, as well as infrastructure development to really support the establishment and distribution and transmission of renewable energy. There's also supposedly support for indigenous and local communities. Now under the National Renewable Energy Program of the Department of Energy. So this is currently in action at the moment. It has targeted the renewable energy share in an increase in the power generation mix of renewables to reach 35% by 2030 and 50% by 2040. So it has set policy and market mechanisms, promoted off-grid and missionary electrification. Importantly, it has also promoted the use of public-private partnerships for large renewable energy development. And it supposedly also aims for inclusive growth. So these are just this is another law that is very related to renewables. We have in place the Environmental Impact Assessment Law, or PD number 1586, which establishes an environmental impact statement. So here I just want to highlight that before there are any renewable projects that can be established outside environmental critical areas or areas with high biodiversity or notable high environmental contribution, there must be an environmental impact assessment done. And of course, this is a whole process that necessitates public participation as well as scientifically sound review of what are the impacts of these renewable energy projects. However, despite all these policies, there have been a number of human rights issues that have been reported with relation to renewable energy projects. So in summary, these are six: environmental degradation, displacement of local communities and indigenous peoples, loss of livelihood, lack of access to information, lack of free prior informed consent and public participation, and also very alarmingly, reprisals on environmental human rights defenders who are speaking out on the projects. So one of the things that I want to highlight with the two following cases that I'll show is that there are supposedly laws in effect that is both supposed to promote renewable energy transition, but also safeguard the communities that will be bearing the brunt of such a transition. However, the laws in paper is not always being implemented. So moving forward, of course, it is important to listen to the people who are actually affected and central to this development and this just transition. So I'll go on to the first. So we have in the Cordillera region, this is in northern Luzon. The Cordillera is considered the water cradle of northern Luzon, with many rich watersheds which feed 6 major river systems. And it has an estimated generation potential of 3,600 megawatts. Um, there are an astounding number of active hydropower projects as well as proposed in this region. So there are 16 hydropower in commercial operation in the region as of 2023, and there are 80 in pre-development and development stage. So in the Cordilleras, there are also a number of very rich indigenous peoples, indigenous cultures. So the region has actually had a very long history of resisting the development aggression brought by hydropower dams all the way back to the 70s. So now with the renewed push for renewables, they are very wary of the impacts that mega hydropower projects will have. So there is this quote from one of the communities that will be affected by a major dam, which where they express, of course, that their resistance to it because it has in the past already destroyed their crops, farmlands, and they recognize also the impacts that it will have on their ancestral land, as well as the other related impacts that it might have on livelihood and culture. So in detail, there have been many issues with free prior informed consent. Many reports of the officials of the Indigenous Commission or National Indigenous Commission actually collaborating to bring about the hydropower projects and resulting in a very in a process with many deficiencies, many um, manipulative process of getting free prior informed consent. So in a sense, there is no free prior informed consent in some of the projects that have been underway. There have been also a number of recorded attacks on indigenous peoples and environmental defenders. So for instance, Stephen Tauli of the Cordillera People's Alliance was abducted in 2022. He was very active in the anti-Saitan dam campaign. Other forms of attacks have also been red tagging, which has been prominent not only, of course, to anti-dam campaigners and indigenous peoples, but also environmental defenders across the Philippines. So red tagging is the act of malicious labeling and designation of activists as related to communist groups, and where they equate their activism with terrorism, which is very gross and dangerous. And it has been shown that red tagging attacks have actually been the precursor of more serious ones, such as arrests, enforced disappearances, and even murders. So other indigenous leaders have also been filed rebellion cases against, and also terrorist financing, where the account of the whole organization would be frozen and they would be unable to do their very important frontline work. And some areas have also had detachments of military forces, which of course causes intimidation and harassment in the communities. And usually these militarization is accompanied by, or it's there to securitize the hydropower projects that will be underway in those areas. So that's just a snapshot of the region. There are more than one project, so it's a bit hard to go into. The second, so that's hydropower. The second threat when it comes to renewables is solar. And on this point, I want to bring up the floating solar farm in Laguna de Bay, or Laguna Lake, which is the largest lake in the Philippines and is a major source of food and water to its neighboring regions. So for this floating solar farm, it is being led by the Sun Asia Energy and other renewable energy firms in partnership with the local agency that manages the lake. Its facility construction is funded by Macquarie Capital and managed by Blue Leaf Energy Asia, which is based in Singapore. So we're, of course, also recognizing the many regional financial and business ties that are connected to these projects, thus the need for a more regional approach to countering the aggression of renewable energy projects. So it's um, expected to cover at least up to 2,000 hectares. So that's a very large scale solar farm and expected to generate up to 1,300 megawatts. And one of the main reports when it came to the solar farm is the complete lack of public participation. So fisher folk have not been given full information on the project and how it would potentially affect them, despite the local agency claiming that they have been consulted. So the local fisher folk have said that they have not been heard at all. Other issues when it comes to the solar farm, of course, since the solar panels would cover large areas of the lake, it is expected to threaten the livelihood of the fisher folk and encroach on traditional fishing grounds as well as fish farms. So fisher folk organizations have warned of these impacts that may affect around 8,500 fisher folk and 2,000 aquaculture workers. So as I said, there have been weak consultations and concerns about being excluded from planning. As Cordillera, the fisherfolk leaders have also been red tagged. So they have been their right to express dissent has been stifled. And along, of course, with the other environmental concerns connected to solar. So with these two cases and the increasing threat as well as the renewed push and actually aggressive push of the current administration to transition to renewables, we really have to center human rights as part of the process and to really ensure the just transition. So just in summary, there are 8 things that we want to um, emphasize here, that just energy transition is, of course, about inclusion, equity, and justice. The whole point is to move away from how we have gotten here. And how we have gotten here has been the exclusion of the voices most affected. So human rights environment should be at the core. There should be stronger human rights language. There should be access to information, meaningful engagement with the local communities and affected indigenous peoples. There should be a zero tolerance policy on reprisals on HRDs. And this, of course, if there have been violations, they must be strongly investigated and stopped. There should be HR policies and grievance mechanisms in place. If there are HRVs, the defenders should know how to seek accountability, how to seek justice. And of course, there must be congruence with like human rights, international human rights standards and national energy transition policies. And lastly, of course, the advancement of local level development or people-centric development, finding alternatives that actually communities are the ones championing and communities are the one running, instead of large privatized renewable energy projects. So I know I'm going over time, so I would like to wrap this up here. Thank you very much for this opportunity to share about the how just transition is going in the Philippines and showing that it is not as just as we want it to be. So hopefully we can all agree that we should move forward with more emphasis on human rights and more solidarity with our environmental human rights defenders on the ground. Thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias, Mati. Sin duda alguna, la transición energética, en palabras de Mati, puede llevar o representar la carga más pesada para las comunidades. Y la transición energética también puede provocar una fractura bastante fuerte en la sociedad. Vamos a pasar de inmediato a nuestro segundo panelista, sin antes recordarles lo importante y lo muy agradecido que estaremos si nos mantenemos en los 8 minutos que tenemos para poder desarrollar el programa tal y como está previsto. Llamo entonces en este momento a Daniel para que nos converse un poco sobre su conversación del día de hoy, explorando el impacto de la tecnología en la lucha por la justicia ambiental en Kenia. Así es que adelante, Daniel. Estamos empezando a las 6:46. Idealmente, perdón, tenemos 8 minutos de aquí hacia adelante. Muchísimas gracias. Adelante, Daniel.
Thank you very much. And let me express my gratitude to the T20 for allowing us to this space. I know this is new to us, but we appreciate the fact that we have been given this opportunity to really discuss the impact of technology, because technology is taking everything across the globe. But the negative part of technology, especially on environmental defenders in Kenya. So my discussion really is focusing on a project which we are doing with other partners, Philippines and other partners across the globe, and we were doing ours within Kenya against the issues related to indigenous peoples, that is the Ogiek, the Sengwer, Yaku, and the Endoros. I know there was to be a PowerPoint, but if it is not available, I'll just proceed on. That there have been a lot of injustice among these communities because most of them are forest-related communities. They've been struggling because of their land and natural resources. But one thing is that most of these indigenous environmental defenders in Kenya have always faced a lot of online attacks using the current social media, which are linked to land rights and environmental protection. So as they are protecting their land, you will always find a message telling you if you continue, you will find your head somewhere, or you will not find your family, or many such issues have been going on. So amongst the Ogiek, personally from the Ogiek community as a founder of the Ogiek People's Development Program, I've faced that before, so it's not new. But now it is changing. It is metamorphosing into other frameworks, which is making the people to fear. Most of them are unable even to stand the issue of the struggle and among their land, because mostly it's about their historical land injustices, compounded with which is mostly facilitated, technology facilitated violence. So we call it technologically facilitated violence because it makes people to have a lot of fear of being in their home, fear of being in their territories. And this has led to a lot of challenges among these communities. So as we did this research, of course, we worked with some universities, Egerton University, which gave us ethical approvals, and then we also obtained a permit from NACOSTI, that's national. It is a national scientific technologies, which is allowing people to do research in Kenya, because we had to get permission from these, so that we are able to do a free research and have a chance to speak to the people. So we use a lot of mixed methods, that is interviews, FGDs, storytelling, and collection of surveys, And also we sample over 265 environmental defenders, which enabled us really to get the perspective. And we also realize a lot of the people who suffer most are the youths. Those are between 26 and 35. Those are the people who are affected because mostly these are the great users of the smartphones and all kinds of technological enables. And then we realize also among the youths, these are 65% of them were men and 35% were women. So you could see also men were been suffering more. And in Kenya, unlike maybe other areas across the globe, I think young men have suffered more on attacks due to using technological or other social related issues. So most of them have either been killed or have suffered because of this. So low participation of women also we realize is because of cultural issues, and they don't have also low literacy levels among the women, and multiple livelihood responsibilities given to the women. And we also realize that there are a lot of challenges going on. Some digital engagement and challenges limited to internet access, also in remote areas. We had also 98% of the respondents having access to digital tools. 65 use smartphones and 16% use those phones in Kenya. They call them kabambe, or those small phones which are not enabled with smartphones. And then we had also the use of other phones, digital literacy among defenders above the age of 50 and associated with limited access to online spaces. I also wish to say that there are a lot of attacks which were limited to either to silence, discrimination, and a lot of technology-facilitated gender-based violence, and many others. These are cases which are found among the Ogiek and also among the other communities. So mostly you find these people are never arrested. Most of them are people who are never arrested. They are just there, and one is that they hide their identity. It is not easily to get them, and some of them, of course, are state actors. In most of them are from they got attacked from Kenya Forest Service, Kenya Wildlife Service, but it is also using tactics which makes the people to live with a lot of fear. So, and these kinds of technological issues also have led to a lot of tension among the communities, which has led to tribal related. So underlying drivers of online violence is natural resource wealth, presence of minerals, forest eviction, conservation disputes, non-implementation of courts, like for us in the Ogiek and the Endorois, where we have courts issues which have not been implemented, which has led to also those kind of violence, or the people are being silenced not to continue fighting in courts. The impacts of this online also is psychological distress, withdrawal from advocacy, community mistrust and fractured movements, limited response from the government. Of course, 40% of reported cases received no action. 40%, nobody followed, and they said, oh, it is very hard to track them. Defenders' response, reporting of platforms, 60% of them, and then blocking perpetrators, 29%, but few structured support system was shown. Support from NGOs like Amnesty International, defenders, but those ones were very regular. It was not common. Maybe they come in when it is really a big or is a big issue. Finally, because of time, let me just say that some of the recommendation is that we should have targeted training program to strengthen digital literacy and digital security awareness of the youths and defenders. And then capacity building of the key local authorities such as chiefs, elders, local police officers to ensure they are familiar with the laws and policies governing online spaces. And then civil society should also band together or be together as to improve the rapid response teams of the human rights institution. And finally, police advocacy to ensure recognition and protection of defenders in Kenya, to ensure a more inclusive digital space where defenders can operate securely and freely. So in Kenya, youth issues, I know you might have been following. There are many very crazy youths now in Kenya because of digital issues, and even it is creating a lot of political issues within the country. And so when it comes to this, it is something, I think Kenya is using a lot of phones. I think more than many countries in Africa, they are very crazy about using phones. And this has led also, it has been used as a way of creating violence. Thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias, Daniel, y muchas gracias por los conocimientos y por mantenerse en el tiempo estipulado. Yo creo que a partir de lo que nos has compartido, la lucha por la búsqueda de la justicia ambiental implica riesgos, implica discriminación, implica criminalización, pero la importancia también de la alfabetización digital en el ánimo de poder aprovechar todas estas oportunidades que emergen a partir de este proceso de transición energética justa. Vamos a proceder de inmediato con el Observatorio Ciudadano con José y con Luna, que nos van a estar compartiendo pues las estrategias de salvaguarda de derechos de la tierra, ambientales y derechos de los defensores en el marco del desarrollo del litio en Argentina, Bolivia y Chile. Adelante, Daniel, y por favor, apreciamos siempre mantenerse en el tiempo. Muy amable.
Gracias a T20, a Asuntos del Sur y a IDRC por esta invitación. Vamos a presentar junto a Luna algunas de las constataciones que hemos hecho en nuestro trabajo de monitoreo sobre los impactos del litio en los derechos humanos de los pueblos y comunidades que habitan en los salares altoandinos de Argentina, Bolivia y Chile. Primero, referirnos al contexto muy brevemente por el tiempo y después a las estrategias que hemos utilizado. El contexto es el de la crisis climática, el de la transición energética comprometida por los estados, fundamentalmente orientado hacia la electromovilidad, y la creciente demanda por el litio se ha incrementado en 20 veces en los últimos, desde el 2000, y se prevé se incrementará en 20 veces más de aquí al 2050. Chile y Argentina producen la mitad del litio, de las sales de litio que se utilizan para esas baterías, para la electromovilidad y otros procesos de la transición energética, pero junto con Bolivia tienen el 50% de las reservas del mundo de estas sales de litio. Eso ha derivado en que esta zona se conozca como el Triángulo del Litio, donde es extraído el litio de estos salares altoandinos, a diferencia de Australia y otros países donde se extrae de roca. Sin embargo, lejos de ser el Triángulo del Litio, este es el territorio tradicional de al menos 10 pueblos indígenas, con una larga historia descendientes de la cultura incaica, con culturas propias, con formas de vida propia que están siendo amenazadas por el desarrollo acelerado del litio. Los países, los tres estados están entusiasmados, están en políticas de atracción de inversión doméstica y de inversión internacional. Chile con capitales estadounidenses, chinos y públicos, Bolivia con capitales rusos y chinas, y Argentina, Luna nos puede contar de ello.
Gracias, José. No, muy brevemente, se aprobó justo hace un año atrás el régimen de incentivo a las grandes inversiones, que es un régimen especial, como decía José, de atracción de inversiones por encima de los 200 millones de dólares en una serie de sectores, uno de ellos el sector de la minería, y bueno, los beneficios son amplísimos, inéditos, y probablemente es un caso bastante excepcional por la amplitud de los beneficios que tiene, beneficios tributarios, beneficios cambiarios, beneficios aduaneros, pero en particular en lo que concierne a esta conversación, beneficios jurídicos en el sentido de un régimen que blinda a las inversiones de, por ejemplo, cualquier ley posterior que se pueda aprobar, aunque sean leyes de protección ambiental, que pudieran afectar esa inversión, ¿no? Entonces, si una provincia decide aprobar una ley que protege determinado aspecto del ambiente, que eso afecta a la inversión, esa ley se declara insanable, ¿no? Se anula de manera automática. Entonces, bueno, es esta especie de búsqueda de garantizar a cualquier costo el negocio, ¿no?
Ok, ¿qué hemos hecho? ¿Cuáles han sido nuestras estrategias? Que era el tema de este panel. Nosotros, nuestra estrategia inicial y fundamental ha sido la documentación. Y hemos trabajado durante un año en documentar esos impactos del litio. ¿Y cuáles son esos impactos que hemos identificado? Fundamentalmente impactos en los derechos a la tierra, toda vez que los estados paralizan los procesos de titulación de tierras para permitir la instalación de las inversiones de litio en estos salares y en sus alrededores. Una ausencia casi total de procesos de consulta y menos aún de consentimiento libre, previo e informado, y una ausencia de la participación, de procesos de participación en los beneficios y compensación por daños que es perceptible en los tres países. Ahora, el mayor impacto es el impacto en las aguas. Para producir una tonelada de litio, de sales de litio, se necesitan 1 millón de litros de agua. Y eso en estos salares que son esencialmente acuíferos, que se ven desecados y se ven impactados por las operaciones de litio. También la contaminación aérea, atmosférica, producto el desecamiento de la salmuera en piscinas de evaporación que antes mostrábamos. Pero otro de los impactos ha sido los impactos al trabajo de los defensores de derechos humanos y ambientales. Y particularmente un caso crítico es el caso de Argentina. Y Luna, si puedes referir a ello.
Sí, bueno, como dice José, efectivamente, además recién hablábamos del RIGI, ¿no? Como un régimen para garantizar los negocios, para garantizar la rentabilidad de los negocios, creo que hay que leer como otra cara de esta misma moneda la creación de dispositivos de seguridad para tratar de reducir todo lo posible cualquier conflictividad que pueda emerger de estas inversiones. Un ejemplo muy concreto, por ejemplo, es la creación de una unidad de seguridad productiva, ¿no? La idea de seguridad productiva es una unidad de las fuerzas de seguridad específica, y acá cito, digamos, la resolución que crea esta unidad que dice brindar seguridad a sectores que requieran un cuidado especial en el proceso de elaboración o transporte de mercaderías, ¿no? Es claramente un cuerpo de seguridad que lo que busca es impedir protestas e impedir conflictos en el marco de procesos productivos. Y de hecho, por ejemplo, durante la aprobación del RIGI hubieron protestas grandes frente al Congreso Nacional cuando se estaba aprobando este régimen de inversiones. Y bueno, y esa protesta fue reprimida fuertemente con más de 600 heridos, 80 detenciones arbitrarias. Bueno, se va creando como un clima donde el mensaje es cualquier conflicto, cualquier protesta que sea un obstáculo para estas inversiones, bueno, no va a ser permitida.
Y otro patrón común Gracias es las dificultades para acceder a la justicia y los problemas de transparencia y de acceso a información. ¿Qué otra iniciativa estamos desarrollando? Una evaluación de impactos en derechos humanos de una empresa en particular en cada país, y hemos focalizado nuestro trabajo con esta metodología basada en la comunidad en empresas de carácter público de Bolivia, de Chile y de Argentina. La otra estrategia ha sido la de desarrollar alianzas con las comunidades involucradas, impactadas, a través de acuerdos de colaboración, a través de reuniones periódicas de compartir información y de talleres en los cuales las tres comunidades de los tres países involucrados se reúnen. También hemos desarrollado una estrategia de visibilizar esta realidad ante los espacios internacionales de toma de decisión e involucrados en que la transición energética sea una transición energética justa. Hemos presentado ante Naciones Unidas en Ginebra, a nivel regional, y también a la relatora especial de cambio climático y derechos humanos. También hemos hecho un monitoreo de dónde vienen los dineros de las empresas, en este caso de Codelco, una empresa estatal chilena, a objeto de hacer un seguimiento posterior de los estándares de derechos humanos y tratar de hacer exigibles esos estándares de derechos humanos a los financieros y a los compradores del litio. Finalmente, la estrategia que hemos desarrollado también es la estrategia de difusión, comunicación, a través de boletines periódicos y de un sitio web al que invitamos a visibilizar. Me quedo ahí en razones del tiempo. Gracias.
Muchísimas gracias, José y Luna. Yo creo que estas tres fantásticas presentaciones nos han dado una idea bastante clara. La transición energética es fundamental para transitar hacia el desarrollo sostenible, enfrentar el cambio climático, pero necesitamos que sea justa, necesitamos que sea equitativa. Yo creo que un llamado fuerte a los tomadores de decisiones, la transición energética puede ser un detonante también de violación de derechos humanos, de desplazamiento, de pérdida de medios de vida de la población, un detonante también de incrementar o profundizar la oscuridad en términos de acceso a la información pública, implica riesgos, implica amenazas para criminalización para los defensores y defensores del ambiente y territorios, y también crea un mensaje central: necesitamos preparar y desarrollar capacidades en nuestras comunidades para que puedan de manera justa y equitativa aprovechar todo el potencial que tiene esta transición energética y que no se convierta en una carga más para las comunidades sin ningún beneficio. Muchísimas gracias a Mati, Daniel, José y Luna por compartir sus pensamientos e ilustrarnos un poco sobre qué está pasando en los retos y oportunidades hacia una transición energética justa. Muchísimas gracias.
Well, thank you very much, Wilmer, and the panelists. My name is Lucia Martelote. I'm from Asuntos del Sur. I'm going to moderate this second panel that is titled Proposed Guidelines for a Just Transition. So building on the risks that were discussed in the previous panel, in this session, we will offer a series of guidelines and also strategies that are grounded in local knowledge and also in evidence. And so I'm going to introduce our speakers. The first one is May Takiban. She's from the Legal Resource Center in the Philippines. Mai is the Executive Director of the Legal Rights and Natural Resources Center Friends of the Earth Philippines, LRC. LRC work focuses on the recognition and protection of the rights of indigenous peoples and underserved frontline communities to land and environment. Through legal action, research, and advocacy, LRC challenges environmental exploitation and advances climate justice. May is the convener of the Panagisa Philippine Network to uphold indigenous people's rights, and she was also the chair of the Alternative Law
groups in the Philippines. She teaches anthropology at the University of the Philippines in Diliman, and she will present on the just transition and just extraction impacts of the scramble of critical minerals for the global south. We also have Francis Coley from the Green Advocates International from Liberia. Francis is a social science expert currently serving as head of programs and lead researcher at Green Advocates International in Monrovia, Liberia. And she's leading projects supported by IDRC. With a Master of Public Policy from the University of Oxford, she has focused on policy reforms in Liberia's mining, forestry, and agriculture sectors, addressing climate crisis, lands and property rights, and promoting rights-based development in post-conflict contexts. Green Advocates International is recipient of the Goldman Environmental Peace Prize for Africa, and empowers communities to participate in managing Liberia's natural resources and advocates for good governance, transparency, and accountability. And her intervention will focus in implementing free, prior, and informed consent in energy projects. And last but not least, we have Jasmina El Amin from the Arab Reform Initiative in Lebanon. She is a PhD candidate at the University College of London and research consultant at ARI, working on just energy transition in Tunisia and Lebanon. Her thesis focuses on a decolonial approach to energy justice and transitions in developing countries with a focus on Lebanon and Tunisia. She holds a master's in environmental technology from Imperial College London with a specialization in water management. She holds over 10 years of experience both in public policy research and international organizations, including work on climate change adaptation, conflict, and migration, water and energy security, and sustainability transitions. And she will speak. Her presentation is called From the Margins to Policy Table, Lessons from Tunisia and Lebanon on Local Knowledge in Energy Transitions. And so, please, Mai, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Allow me to navigate the share button. In the meantime. Okay, I hope everybody can see my presentation. My presentation actually straddles a bit of presenting the issues, and if I have enough time, get to some suggestions. I don't mind being timed, so I'm going to look at you, Lucia, to kind of cue me how many more minutes I have left. Okay, here we go. I'll try not to speak very fast, but I will speak fast. So just a premise, no? What we have here is something that I found. This is sourced from the U.S. Department of State, and of course, we're all very cognizant of how everybody is speeding up towards this decarbonization, towards a just transition. And what we have here is a infographic on mineral security partnership members, and what we see is that this mineral security, what it actually translates to is securing the supply for the global north. That is the infrastructure to build all of this renewable energy. My second slide is a photograph from a mining tenement in the Philippines, of which a lot of the minerals mined here are critical minerals or strategic minerals, nickel, for the just transition infrastructure. I think my presentation wants to belabor the supply chain, because when we transition infrastructure does not come out of nowhere. These are tangible materials. These are minerals. These are, this also has ecological effects. The cost of transition also is being borne by communities. Please keep in mind what Matty's presentation earlier, and this kind of builds into that. No, the Philippines is the second largest in terms of nickel production, second only to Indonesia. The impacts of that are, of course, environmental, toxic spills, etc. Example, Rio Tuba in Palawan, the displacement of indigenous peoples, Lumad communities. And this photograph is actually of people being displaced in Mindanao, a particular region called Caraga, which the government has touted as the mining capital of the Philippines. Many of the minerals produced out of this region is nickel. And I think Matty has labored earlier that when communities do resist and protest against large-scale mining projects, their resistance movement is often met with violence, repression. But this is not new. Mining, in fact, has long been a site of violence in the Philippines, not just in the Philippines, but in many parts in Southeast Asia. We can recall very easily, for example, the situation in Myanmar, when you have conflict financing so that you have geopolitical stresses in their interest for mining. Here is I've always wanted to be a photographer, and it's very unfortunate that the first photograph that I took that gets featured in the news is of our community partner, and it's almost and it is a eulogy, because this community partner was actually massacred. Her family was massacred, and this is circa 2012, before all of this branding of renewable energy, of just transition, etc., etc. Mining has really featured in a lot of our conference today is called Epistemic Justice, and mining and the policies that support it. I would argue and forward that it's epistemic violence that actually happens. The policies that support mining, the extractives in the Philippines are such that conflict and violence is actually what facilitates the easy harnessing or extraction of minerals in the Philippines. So this is a photograph that a colleague of mine took when he went to Palawan. This is Bataraza, another one of the very big nickel mining in the Philippines. Palawan Island is called also as the lost frontier in the Philippines, because of its ecological biodiversity. But in this last frontier is slowly being denuded, giving way to the expansion of mining for nickel, precisely for the just transition. In the same case, as Matty earlier said, whether that's renewable energy, you have an erasure of communities, an erasure of their rights, where free, prior, informed consent is not even a suggestion as far as policy mandate in the Philippines, because it is really required by our law. It's under the Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act, but that is often ignored. And again, we posit this exactly as the very opposite of epistemic justice. This also is a manifestation of epistemic violence. And just to show the supply chain, at the base of it, the materials is taken in the Philippines, but once Tesla gets sold in the Philippines, BYD gets sold in the Philippines, they're sold at exorbitant prices that a lot of people are not able to afford it. You have your middle upper class. And so when you speak of access to just transition, it doesn't serve where many of the minerals are coming from. Just to highlight some of the complications, this is a map of Balbalasang. This is a national park, supposed to be a protected area, but it is also a site of what you call competitive renewable energy zones. which are designated geographical areas with high potential for cost-effective renewable energy. And 56% of our CREZ areas are actually straddling on indigenous people's lands. So you have a situation where it's almost primed for violence when you have communities that are resisting such development, so-called development aggression, because these are the sites of their sacred sites, etc., site of their heritage. I think Mati had touched on this very early on, because this is also the site. What you see here is a photograph of Makliing Dulag, and his struggle in the very beginning in the 1970s was also against a renewable project when it was not yet the mode. It was a mega dam project by the senior Marcos. Now we have the junior Marcos that is pushing for renewable energy. And it was actually the death of Makliing Dulag that consolidated the early consolidation of the indigenous people's rights movement. And it seems like it's a circular thing. Here we are again, no, with indigenous peoples still doing the same thing. There's nothing romantic about that. The struggle just keeps on repeating itself. This competition for land as well, this different paradigm, this different worldview of how we look at, for example, a national park and what that means for different peoples. To complicate the things, no? Also within the area of Kalinga, you have a mining corporation, which is actually a subsidiary of an Australian-based foreign corporation that is wanting to explore the area for copper and gold. Copper, as we know, is also part of the strategic transition minerals, no? And what is confounding about this is that this foreign corporation is seeking a loan from the government's what we call the Maharlika Investment Fund, which is the Philippines' first sovereign wealth fund, to actually bridge a loan facility for its exploration. Now, it's as if we're being fried in our own fat, so to speak. No, so much for foreign direct investment when they're asking for loan from our very own government, all couched within this neo-capitalist mode of how do you call this, capital for renewable energy, you know, better couch is that. Of course, the question of renewable energy is very existential. It invites a personal reflection for all of us, because it's also about our comforts, you know, our dependence on our technologies and so on. And this is a photograph. This is a lovely photograph of the night sky of Metro Manila. But even as I speak of the global supply chain from extractivism to renewable energy within the Philippines, you also have this disparity where you have indigenous peoples that have no access to electricity. And that compounds their marginalization, because how do they study? How do they actually have healthy food, etc.? Okay, I will sum up very quickly. And pretty much this is, if I were to have a thesis, this is it, you know, the paradox of green extraction, because this relationship still is very, it's replicating colonial patterns. If not replicating, it just still is the same, no? But because this panel is all about suggestions, very quickly, these are some of the precepts, some of the ideas that we want to propound and how we go about doing a just transition, just minerals transition that then serves or feeds into just renewable transition. So these again are some of our suggestions, no? A very hard reflection on, I will jump to ecological limits, because after all, renewable energy is still needs, it streams through tangible material. There's still materiality to renewable. And when we're in a system that still propounds, for example, infinite growth, but that infinite growth is really bounded by finite resources, then there's the challenge for all of us. No? So I think I will end there. Thank you for extending me for a minute.
Thank you very much, May. Very interesting presentation, and we are we have some troubles with time, so we are going to go with the next one, the next speaker, who is Francis Collie. So you have the floor, Francis. I don't know if you are there, Francis. If not, we can go with Jasmina, and then we come to you.
I think he's here, but he's muted.
Okay. Francis, can you please unmute yourself?
Should I go?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah. So hi, everyone. And first, thank you for having me, and thank you for the panelists for the very inspiring interventions. I'm very happy to be presenting the Arab Reform Initiative today. And I think I just wanted to start by saying how important it is to have this conversation on just transition, and that we can exchange stories from different regions. There's a lot I'm going to take with me, so thank you. Now to start, I wanted to maybe center the conversation in our political present and the context. So I think we've had this conversation before, but I think we should always keep in mind the role of AI that is increasing dramatically nowadays. And we've always spoken about how it impacts jobs, but actually the thing that we should really be wary about is the energy expansionism that comes with it. I think it was not that long ago when the US Secretary said that talked about Paraguay and said that the electricity surplus from their dam, whose contract expired recently with Brazil, should be used for AI development in the US. So I think we're going to see a new form of green grabbing linked to AI, and I think we should always try to incorporate this in our work. And similarly, we're seeing Europe racing for green energy security through highly extractive projects like green hydrogen that I'm going to be talking about, and an increasing spending on miniaturization while a shrinking of civic space and a shrinking of overall aid, like we've seen with USAID. On the other hand, we're seeing just transition becoming more and more a mainstream and popular concept. Everyone's talking about it, including World Bank, IMF, BP. But what's happening is that there's this big de-radicalization of it and stripping of its core meanings that for the Global South are very rooted in issues of race, of gender, of power, capitalism, extractivism, colonialism. So I think I wanted to start this conversation by highlighting the importance of local knowledge and local contexts and the need to reclaim these demands and to center just transition in the contextual reality of our countries. So in this talk, I'm going to reflect on the local knowledge, the inclusion and the exclusion of local knowledge in renewable energy projects in Lebanon and Tunisia. Through my research, both with ARI and my PhD, I asked questions on participation, on power, on inclusivity, and on knowledge production, like whose knowledge is being recognized, who's being who's being excluded, and at what extent. How is participation actually looking like in practice? And is it actually a dignified process? And more importantly, how can we develop and scale models where local knowledge is considered as equal footing to expert knowledge and not just as something that we sometimes consult? So I'm drawing on the experiences of Lebanon and Tunisia and how knowledge was either excluded or somehow included, and I hope we can learn lessons from these two countries. So I'm going to start by Tunisia. For those of you who do not know the country, it's a country in North Africa that's highly dependent on fossil fuels, on gas. And despite their renewable energy potential, they only have 3 to 4% of renewable energy as a part of their energy mix. In Tunisia, there's a very long history of communal resistance to extractive projects, and this started long before the so-called energy transition. And this happened geographically in the south and interior of the country that's long been marginalized at the expense of coastal cities. And actually, one of the demands of the revolution that happened in Tunisia in 2011 was to address this regional disparity. But unfortunately, in 2021, Tunisia slipped back towards authoritarianism. President Said dissolved parliament. And since then, key decisions like granting concessions to foreign companies or doing any sort of decisions linked to renewable energy projects are now linked to presidential decrees. So for example, in the past couple of years, there's 5 big projects of renewable energy that were accepted through presidential decrees, bypassing any democratic processes. So this authoritarianism has had legal implications. In October 2022, there was a decree that was passed that basically exempted renewable energy projects from requiring agricultural land reclassification. So this was another challenge to any sort of progress that was done on having democratic processes that protect communal lands and protect communities from extractive projects. And to top this up, recently, Tunisia is becoming a potential hub of renewable energy for Europe, both for renewable energy projects and green hydrogen. There is a big energy project called the El Med Interconnector, which is meant to connect Tunisia and Europe, and where renewable energy will probably be exported to Europe. There's going to be some exchange, but this is a project meant for export. On the other hand, they're eyeing also Tunisia for green hydrogen projects that, as many of you know, are highly intensive in water and highly land intensive. And many of these projects are set to happen in the south and interior of the country, where a lot of fossil fuel and hydrocarbon projects have already taken place and have put a lot of pressure on communities that have basically been stripped from their rights to development and have had their lands taken away from them and have seen nothing from the benefits of these projects. So I just wanted to highlight in Tunisia maybe 2 or 3 cases where local knowledge was not incorporated and what that meant and what were the repercussions of it. So the first one is the area called Gabis. The Gulf of Gabis has historically suffered from a highly polluting extractive phosphate production. And there's been a lot of resistance from the communities to any sorts of projects that are linked to this extractive industry. But what appears to be happening is that one of the first projects for green hydrogen, a pilot project for green ammonia, is set to happen in the Gulf of Gabis probably by the end of this year. We are not sure. And if you speak to the government, which we've done at IRI, they will tell you that there's a lot of consultations. You go on their website, there's actually pictures of these consultations, but when you speak to communities on the ground, nobody knows who is being actually consulted. So I wanted to highlight this issue of selective consultation, or in Tunisia, what they call speaking to the liberal expert. And so what happened as a result of that, there was a very big protest on the 23rd of May that was organized by a local organization of a group of activists called Stop Pollution. They rallied thousands of people who protested mainly pollution, but who incorporated in their demands opposition to green hydrogen projects. A second and important, I think, example is that of Bijj Salhi, which is a town in the north of Tunisia. This project was implemented in the Ben Ali regime days, so before the revolution. But the resistance and the repercussions of this project is still being resonating today, and specifically this lack of inclusion of local knowledge. So basically, this is a project where wind turbines were built too closely to communities, where agricultural lands were stripped away from people, where despite the emphasis of local communities to have their knowledge be considered in terms of which areas should be used for renewable energy development, none of these projects were, none of their demands were heard. And as a result, there's back and forth protests, there's in communities, these communities refuse to pay their bills, and it's again a site of contestation. So I think this mainly sums up the case of Tunisia, where all of these top-down projects are coming down, where there's no inclusion of local knowledge. And on the other hand, communities, activists are resisting. This is the only thing they can do in this space, where there's like a crackdown on civic spaces. They've been resisting. And this is what CSOs have told us as part of our project. We've been speaking to CSOs, and they've been telling us that this is the main thing they can do. They've tried accessing information. They could not access information, despite it being a constitutional right. But one of the things that I wanted to highlight is an endeavor that was done by a group of trade unions working on energy democracy in Tunisia. And actually, they've built their group based on an alliance with Latin American trade unions. So again, iterating the importance of these alliances. And so what they've tried to do is having this campaign that proposes the alternative, that proposes energy communities with a role for public utilities, but still having communities have a right to self-determination, have a right to energy sovereignty. And they went around different areas in Tunisia where projects are said to be happening, providing them with information, making sure that they understand what it means to basically lease their land to a company, what is the actual price of the land that they should be requiring. So a sort of strategy of raising awareness while also mobilizing and proposing alternatives. The problem is that this is quite costly, and the political environment in Tunisia has been quite difficult. So they have struggled with this. And at the same time, the public utility has been facing decades of neoliberal policies, which has meant that its ability to provide viable alternatives is always undermined by shrinking budgets, removal of subsidies, etc. So wanted to highlight this because I think these are things that can be shared and can be exchanged across different panelists. Now, moving on to Lebanon. Don't know how I'm doing on time, but so I'm going to try.
Just 1 minute.
Oh, 1 minute. Okay. So basically what I wanted to say about Lebanon is that for me, it's always the odd one out, but I see it as a sort of a country that sees global challenges before they come to other countries. And so Lebanon has seen since 2019 the collapse of its electricity sector. And so in response to that, there's been a lot of self-organizing and a lot of communal projects that have sort of sprouted out across the country just because there was no electricity anymore. There were no alternatives. And so communities have gone towards communal renewable energy projects. Basically, what I wanted to say, since I'm short on time, is that because of this ownership and because of this self-organization, there are elements that we can learn from what has been happening in Lebanon. There's been, of course, a lot of injustice, a lot of unorganization and unsustainability, but at the same time, because communities have had to raise their own money and basically fund their own projects, there's been quite a lot of ownership that is being done. There's been quite a lot of consultations that are being done because basically they have to reach out to their diaspora to help them raise part of the money. And so they had to secure a lot of buy-in from local communities. That's one. Two, there were actually lots of, in certain areas, of course, not in all, lots of consultations that were done in terms of willingness to pay. There were consultations on schedules of energy provision, like considering even women and their duties in the household and which schedules would suit better their schedule. And so maybe just to finish, I wanted to say that in this time, I think these sort of exercises are very important, and I hope that we can build on these moments and build on solidarity and try to scale or at least exchange alternatives that seem viable and can resist this dominant narrative that just transition has been having. And thank you. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Yasmina, for your presentation and also for sharing very specific examples that I think that are very valuable for our conversation. And well, let's see if Francis is here with us.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much, Francis.
My honor.
Yes, yes. Go ahead, please.
Okay. All right. All right. Thank you. I'm from Liberia, like they said, Francis. So quickly, I will be going through what it means in terms of implementing free, prior, and informed consent in energy projects, given the Liberian perspective. So it is clear to all of us that oil, gas, and mining companies, they are aware of the need to secure and maintain a social lesson. They all are aware of that. And that means to operate, they need that. So they are all getting very much involved with all these FP processes. But somehow the Liberian reality is a bit different in terms of commitment versus reality on the ground. So the FP process in practice, I will go through that briefly for Liberia. First, there's this international definition, which we all are aware of, that was provided by the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous issues back in 2005. And it clearly laid out the 4 areas. Free means people are not coerced, pressure or intimidated in their choices of development. 2, prior, it means their consent is sought and freely given prior to the authorization of development activities. And 3, informed, they have full information about the scope and impacts of the proposed development activities on their land, resources, and well-being. And lastly, consent, their choice to give or withhold consent over development affecting them is respected and upheld. So with that parameter, Liberia, under Liberian laws, for example, the Commercial Rights Law, Section 2.2c, they are saying any decision, agreement, or activity affecting the status or use of community forest resources shall not proceed without the free, prior, informed consent of the affected communities. But we have very serious implementation challenges regarding FPIC. First is the definitional issue regarding who qualifies as indigenous peoples to be consulted. So this is our major struggle in Liberia. Our communities have not been defined as indigenous people, and I think this is something everybody should take note of, because if you are underdefined, it means it's going to be very difficult for you to claim the kind of benefit you required. So like I said, recently, the IFC, that is the International Finance Corporation, denied our communities their right by advising its clients, which is the Salala Rubber Corporation, not to treat our communities as indigenous people. So this is just a summary of the finding in the report, which is online. The IFC pre-investment review did not present an adequate assessment of its decision to not trigger performance standard 7, that is indigenous people, for its investment. So in the context of the project's location, community use of a language distinct from their official language, and individuals' expression that they are indigenous, as should have been conducted. As a result, IFC pre-investment review was not appropriate to the statute and nature of the project, and or commensurate with the level of environmental social impact assessment risks and impact assessment. So this is just a summary of what they found in terms of the IFC deciding not to include or define our communities as indigenous, and that really affected us. At the community level in Liberia, the way the earthquake process is happening, it is always compromise. That is, it does not meet international best practice. Normally, they are having workshops, and at these workshops, they are just providing basic information about the company, about who they are, but they're leaving no room to ask the people about the impact of the investment on them. For example, to give them both the benefit and the challenges of the project. Our communities are not benefiting from that. So it is all about just saying how good it will be, development, but they don't show that there will be loss of access to foreign land, there will be access to water resources, there will be distortion of cultural practices. I'm telling you now. So on the midday, you have what they call inducement. There is so much fanfare on the day they are having this workshop, food, there's so much alcoholic drink, and then they are bringing money. They're going to change the United States dollar into local currencies, and they bring it down into bags and then put that out on display. Okay, so it means that that's inducement. To be able to show, accept us, we have so much money, we'll help you. That's inducement. The second aspect is that they're going to bring about all the local authorities, including the law enforcement officers. And so there's a police commander and all these people are there. So this is intimidation at the same time. So inducement and intimidation have application this work. The next thing is political will. To implement FPIC, you require political will. But what we have is a situation where, because Liberia is a post-conflict country, and so the tendency to create economic activity is all the way out there. So this is undermining the government's ability to protect rights and at the same time do business. So what we have is a priority for business at the expense of local communities. So the political will is not really there because there's a commitment to investment over human rights. The next thing is look at our environmental impact assessment. I don't know what is happening in other countries. The environmental impact assessment that should really be able to strengthen the FPIC process is happening when the concession has already been awarded and ratified by the parliament, which means the concession is already cast in stone. So the environmental social impact assessment that we see them doing is more like a dress rehearsal or a mere formality, because actually no company has already been denied its investment because the EIA was very poor. So that's the key challenge we have. Then we come back to how FPIC should happen based on our experience in Liberia. So first, after establishing the business case, which is always the first thing multinational corporation will do, they have to also establish the social case. And they are not doing that. So we believe the business case versus the social case will make the case for the investment. But the priority is just on the business case for the investment and not the social case for the investment. The other thing for us is that the company should comply with requirement for FPIC under international and national law. The company policy, that is its own policy and obligation to third parties, such as project leaders, etc. So this means one, respecting the law. If a country has passed national law specific to FPIC, they should respect that. B, they should be meeting third-party obligation, for example, demonstrating compliance with project finance requirements, such as, like I said, the IFC performance standard, etc. They should be able to implement FPIC throughout the project cycle. What we see them doing is that they do one FPIC in one project activities, and when they have additional project activities, they don't care about that. And we have a national FPIC framework or guideline in Liberia that is also supporting that. Meaning, if a company conducted an FPIC before, the government is not expecting this company to conduct another FPIC. So we think this is something that we need to really work on. The other thing is that we think they should be able to apply FPIC not only to indigenous people, but also to all our communities. And they should be able to build trust within the communities and to avoid conflict. The last part of my presentation is focusing on what activists can do. because we have said a lot about what the company should be doing in order to achieve proper FPIC, but then what can NGOs or activists really do? One would say they should try to address the definitional issue in terms of who qualifies to be consulted. That's very important. This is to ensure that all constituencies, including vulnerable groups such as, like I said, indigenous people and local communities, can qualify. The next thing is they should make effort to improve land rights in their country. If this is not something they have prioritized, we think it's key. For example, until we pass the 2018 Land Rights Act, the government of Liberia treated all land that was not deeded as public land. And they were using this category of land to award large-scale concession. Now that we clarify land right, the government is no longer the owner of all the land, and this is making it difficult to award large-scale concessions that could violate FPA rights. The other one for us is that where FPIC process is weak or non-existent in applicable laws or policies or standards, our advice to activists is to take advantage of international mechanisms, laws, standards, procedures, and policies that are applicable to companies and the government in their country. We think that's one way to work. The other point for us is to seek redress for harm suffered as a result of multinational corporation. They should take advantage of grievance mechanism on certification schemes or international commitment by companies or government. This was our success story in Liberia when we took on the oil palm companies, especially using the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil. They call that RSPO. So we took advantage of that, and you can't believe it worked miracles. When the government threatened the company to now work with the local communities, because there was this international commitment, the company said no, and they came and had a dialogue with the communities, and we think that was good. The other point is to spend time on community organizing and raise awareness of their rights in both national and international laws. It is good to do the research and find out how FPIC is applicable to a community. You can look at, like I said, the different laws and raise awareness of their rights and how they can be able to demand where they have violations. And the other one for is you can also be very creative and show you are also solution-oriented in terms of your engagement with private sector actors. Activists should not only be about advocacy against the investment or raising awareness of the communities, but also be in the part of solving the problem. So like in our case, we proposed solution before. For example, one company we suggested a sustainable partnership initiative. This is why we introduced that brought together the company, the government, and the communities. And this was good because normally a company grievance mechanism is already there, but the community issues are always coming out. But now when you have a forum where the communities are sitting with the government, the company, and development partners, so all the grievances are brought on the table and you can easily address that. Lastly, you can also call to audit an FPIC process. I think this is something you can do. If you think a company has conducted quote unquote proper FPIC, you can challenge them to that. You can challenge them to that. You can ask for an independent audit of that FPIC process. We did that in Liberia, 2 multinational corporations. We'll work with them, we challenge their FPIC process, and then we ask for a third-party evaluation of the process, and they agree. And the results show that there was improper FPIC for their investment in the 2 locations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Francis, for sharing your experience and these strategies and the things that we have to take into account when thinking these problems and also the local communities. And well, now I'm going to give the space for Nacho Lara, that he's going to share some final remarks.
Okay, thank you very much, Lucia, and thank you very much to all participants for giving us the opportunity to analyze and address these key issues regarding the just energy transition. I'm convinced that this second step, after the one that we made in Brazil, will strengthen our efforts to raise awareness about the importance of human rights in debate about energy transition, and also make the voices and needs of indigenous, land, and environmental defenders more visible in this realm. But before I try to synthesize the main dimensions that may comprise these guidelines for a just energy transition from and for the Global South, that is one of the key outcomes of this side event, I would like to introduce Tanya Bandula-Irwin from the IDRC. Tanya is a political scientist who works at the intersection of armed conflict, civic space, and governance. She has led field research on governance in conflict and fragile settings in the Philippines and Somalia, and now helps shape research funding strategies at the International Development Research Center. Her work focuses on how local actors navigate and reshape power in fragile and high-risk settings, with particular attention to repression and exclusion. Tanya holds a PhD from the University of Toronto and brings almost a decade of experience bridging academic research and policy. Tanya, you have the floor.
Thanks so much, Nacho. I realize we are a little bit behind. I had prepared about 5 minutes of remarks, which grew because I was taking notes. It might take us a little bit over the hour mark, but I'll try and be quick. I want to say thank you all to the speakers today. It's been a powerful and honest discussion, grounded in lived experience, practical knowledge, a shared sense of urgency, but most importantly, a documentation of evidence to make a strong case for the calls to action put forward today. I have learned so much, and I'm thankful for this research and the work that you're doing. If I could offer 2 to 3 key takeaways from the conversation, just from a high-level observation of lessons across these contexts. So first, as Nacho pointed out, a lot of what was said today echoes some of what was heard last year in Rio. Rights are still not embedded in transition frameworks, and if they are not necessarily respected in implementation. Communities are still excluded from decision-making processes. The urgency of FPIC remains, but it remains, especially in practice, important. There are strong threads still around the risks that defenders are facing in online spaces, but also physically at the hands of the state and physical actors. But we are pushing closer. Despite these similar challenges and similar calls to action, we are becoming more equipped with information, data, and evidence that we heard today, which makes the better case and better equips us as we carry on down this road. The second reflection I'd like to raise is it's not only about centering defenders and those most affected, but redefining the role of defenders in local communities. And this goes to reorganizing the epistemology and the types of knowledge that we value, and that came up several times today. So defenders are not just victims to be protected, they are leaders, innovators, and essential governance actors. And in order to actually have effective climate action and a just transition for energy, this requires this epistemological shift to value local level knowledge. And third, I wanted to reflect on CalAID's role. So CalAID being a community of practice, it reflects an approach to build lasting knowledge alliances. So today's discussion reflects real momentum of learning and sharing across contexts. There is more momentum together, at least that is the contention or sort of the idea of IDRC behind supporting a network like CalAID. This is not a one-off intervention. This is a network meant to outlast the immediate threats that everyone is facing into the future. I want to reflect on some calls to action, which Nacho, I'm sure you'll expand on, but just some that came to light for me today. The urgent implementation of free, prior, and informed consent and discussions about costs and benefits, which include affected communities, not only in theory, but in practice. The need to hold states to account for the agreements that they sign, especially in the context of a decay of multilateralism and a seeming disavowance to the norms and laws, and the emboldenment of states and private actors to ignore rights, restrict civic space, and even use violence and force towards their ends. This includes incorporating private actors into the agreements and commitments that tend to include states primarily. Another key call to action that really struck me is the emphasizing justice in the just transition. And so Mai mentioned this in the paradox of green extraction, and Yasmina mentioned it about reshaping global power dynamics around the just transition so that the benefits in terms of the environmental protection of a green transition can go to the communities that are actually enabling and are central to the transition itself. If I could also offer a call to action for think tanks and civil society and thought leaders, it would be to continue to build cross-regional solidarity like what we have seen today, these inter-movement alliances. So environmental human rights defenders, yes, but we're seeing backlash across a whole wide range of human rights across the board. So cross-movement solidarity as well, and continue to gather evidence and to bear witness. As Jose mentioned, documenting these impacts alone is essential to bringing attention from the world and building solidarity across contexts. So with that, I'll hand it back over to Nacho for some additional concluding thoughts and calls to action. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Tanya, for your words. As you have said, also today's discussions that were informed by insight from various countries and regions underscore systemic issues. And these findings compel a unified call to action. We must advocate for stronger human rights language in energy policies, ensuring access to information and meaningful engagement with affected local communities and indigenous peoples. It is very important to implement, as you've mentioned, zero-tolerance policies on reprisals against defenders, providing them with technical support, digital literacy training, and robust grievance mechanisms. And also it is important that states and corporations must be held accountable for human rights violations, transparently disclosing projects details and ensuring benefit sharing. Having said that, you know that as an outcome of this side event, we will submit a final report to the G20, so the G20, so recommendations for the G20 governments to implement this kind of policies. Of course, they are recommendations that let's see if they are going then to incorporate them. But from what our panelists have said, we can conclude on 4 dimensions that are key. So to center on human rights, to uphold free, prior, and informed consent, to safeguard defenders, and to promote transparency and accountability as the 4 main pillars of these guidelines for a just energy transition. These principles are not negotiable for a transition that is truly equitable, inclusive, and sustainable for you. So once again, thank you very much, and I hope that we will continue having the opportunity to share other spaces of reflection and policy recommendation. Thank you very much.